Hey everyone, so it's been a hot minute since I made a video, but I wanted to discuss today exercise intolerance or post-exertional malaise because this has been coming up in conversations lately and I don't think I've ever made a video on it, so I thought I would discuss it today. And I wanted to mention I am doing coaching again Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays from 12 to 5 p.m. Mountain Time, and I'll put the link to my calendar in the description of this video. And keep in mind that my views and ways of thinking about things are constantly evolving and changing as time goes on and as I talk to more and more people and do more research, and nothing is ever, I try not to think in black and white terms or extremes, which I think happens a lot in this community. I try to take a balanced, logical approach. So even my coaching style is very much non-extreme. I used to be much more of an extreme thinker, but I've realized that, every situation is very individual and very personal, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. And I don't like to take that stance of all or nothing because I think it can be incredibly detrimental in life in general and in this community in particular. And so post-exertional malaise is really fairly common from what I've seen, and it just means an increase in symptoms after minimal exertion. And I'll speak to my own experience first. So my initial withdrawal was in 2018 after a 4-week taper from 7 years of SSRI use. And I've always been someone who loves exercising. I love cardio. I love runner's high. I love endorphins pumping. I like lifting weights. I always like to do, circuit training and exercise classes. And I noticed that consistently, so not just the odd time, that when I would try to exercise, keep in mind I was more functional in my first withdrawal, I'd get really sick afterwards. And so I would notice like my face would swell and I'd feel pressure, burning pain in my eyes. I would feel really, really nauseated and just this bone crushing fatigue that would lie me flat on my back for days. And I didn't understand it because I'd always felt really healthy and well after working out. It always was my kind of stress reliever and my insomnia reliever, and it was really a coping skill I used most of my adult life and to balance my blood sugars because I'm diabetic. And suddenly it was like I couldn't tolerate exercise and I didn't understand why. And then I had my disastrous reinstatement 2.5 years into my first withdrawal, and subsequent like benzo use for 3 months, and I tried I think 9 or 10 other drugs because I was still suffering mentally from that first withdrawal. And so, keep in mind also that I tend to segment this withdrawal experience into acute and then windows and waves and then kind of turning a corner. And in general, so this doesn't apply to everyone, of course, but the acute phase where things are just really intense and relentless is often the first 6 months. And then between 6 months and 24 months, a lot of people will notice more of a windows and waves pattern, and they'll start to notice things shifting. And then as they approach closer to 2 years, they might turn a corner or feel like they're more functional. This is what happens with a lot of people. And so acute, a lot of times you're just drawing from hopeful stories online, support, and you're just in pure survival mode. So this might not apply to you, what I'm talking about then, because you might not, you'd be like, well, I can't exercise at all, unless you have, akathisia and you're pacing around and that's kind of your exercise. But typically, this post-exertional malaise is minimal effort is causing an increase in symptoms, and people will say exactly that. And in my second withdrawal, I had all of the neurological symptoms. I was way worse than I was in my first withdrawal, and I felt the need to be moving, and it was so hard for me to relax because of all of my neurological symptoms. And so I would, be walking around, moving around, but I couldn't do like anything beyond that. So which was terrible because at this point it had been a couple of years where I wasn't able to enjoy and tolerate the exercise that I had loved throughout my adult life. And so what I started doing more and building into my routine as time went on in my second withdrawal was a more structured, okay, I need to get out every day and walk. I need it for my blood sugars. I just felt like being outside and walking and being exposed to the sun and doing it kind of in a structured way was going to be good for me, and a way to, I don't know, I was so desperate to try to heal my brain. I'm like, okay, exercise is good for healing the brain, right? And I really struggled to walk alone because my mental symptoms were so bad. And so I've told a lot of people this in coaching calls and maybe even in videos, that I was constantly connected to my own support group of 10 women. And there was often a combination of us online throughout the day, every day, and we would video chat. So I would walk outside jerking and, with my brain just in a horrible state, trying to distract by talking, and I was walking. Like, I have old videos from 2021 where I'm outside, I had headphones on and I'm walking and I'm just talking to my support group, or just talking to myself if no one happened to be available, just like talking into the camera, because I just needed to be distracted all the time, but I felt like I also needed to move my body. And so it was nothing like the types of workouts I was used to, but I figured maybe I could build up to what I used to do. So as time went on, I very slowly was increasing how much I was walking outside. It started out really low. It started out, walking around the block or doing 5-10 minutes, and then it built up slowly over a long period of time to where I was then walking an hour a day. And now every single day I walk between an hour and an hour and a half. And I've also started lifting small weights again when I have the opportunity and the time. And it's been nice because even though I still don't do what I used to do. Well, partially that's because I have my daughter now and she's with me all the time, and so I can push her in the stroller while I walk, and I just don't have the same amount of time to be able to do this full-on workout at home with her there. But it's been something that I've really had to work on. And just like everything else in this experience, when you're kind of reintegrating and you're moving out of the acute phase and you're trying to build your life back up, most of these things happen in phases. I call it brick by brick. You're just rebuilding brick by brick by brick. And exercise can be part of that as well. So if you're someone who has exercise intolerance, post-exertional malaise, and you really notice an increase in symptoms after you do any type of exercise that's kind of gets your blood and heart pumping, and it's increasing that nervous system response, and your symptoms are going up. And so it can be something where you might have to really dial it down to almost nothing and build up really slowly. That's what I did, and it was successful for me. But keep in mind, I've also been drug-free for 3.5 years. So that's one way to do it, and to try to reintegrate this exercise back into your life if you're someone that really misses it and used to enjoy doing it. There's another kind of approach too, and I wanted to say, actually, before I get into that other approach, that I often will talk about, in my other videos, other conditions that are chronic and not well understood, but have very similar symptoms to protracted withdrawal. And so these can include long COVID, chronic Lyme, those types of things, chronic fatigue syndrome, and they can include a lot of neurological symptoms and psychiatric and everything. And consistently with a lot of these, post-exertional malaise is also on there. And so I could argue these are all due to nervous system dysregulation, and your brain is starting to perceive a lot of things as threats. And so I've talked about neural retraining, and it's not the be all and end all, and it can be formal or informal. But if you look at across these conditions, so many people develop sensitivities not only to exercise but to food, supplements, all these kind of benign things, chemicals. Or maybe chemicals are not all benign, but they should be somewhat benign, but people are just reacting and reacting and reacting. And what these programs go through, and what I've seen work for other people, even in informal ways, is kind of standing up to the symptoms. And so obviously not pushing yourself too hard where you're just so overwhelmed and so ill. But even if you start building back up into an exercise routine and you are noticing an uptick in symptoms, just kind of pushing against that and being okay, my brain is perceiving threat. Even though I'm not in a threatening situation, I'm standing up to it. And this is what these retraining or these courses are based around when it comes to all types of sensitivities. And I've talked to people with severe symptoms who really want to get back into the gym and do stuff and are not in acute, and they've really been like, you know what, bring it on, like bring on the symptoms. I know this is good for my body. It might flare a little bit, but I just need to tell my brain and body and teach it either formally or informally that it's safe again. And this can be really effective across all of these different types of sensitivities. So I wanted to mention that. And also that kind of segues into what I was going to say next, which is, or maybe I just kind of lost my train of thought, but standing up to the symptoms as you're building these routines back into your life can also be very effective. So it's kind of a combination of not overdoing it and trying to build slowly up to, you know, a higher and higher tolerance, but also not backing off if your symptoms flare. And again, this is something where you're not going from, you know, being couch bound or bed bound and then suddenly just pushing yourself way past your limit and trying to jog for an hour. I'm not saying that, and your symptoms just really flare, but, you know, trying to take it one step at a time, building things back up, and if you notice a flare, pushing up against it. So this is where in DNRS you would go through your, I forget what they call it, like the steps or the rounds. You would basically, you're trying to teach your limbic system that this is a benign activity, it's perceiving it as threatening, and you're trying to like make it feel safe again. So let me know your thoughts on this. Have you noticed this in your own withdrawal? Do you have severe post-exertional malaise? Do you notice just a minor flare-up in symptoms? And how far out are you? I'm just curious because I have noticed that people tend to have this quite a bit, and they mention it to me quite a bit. And so I'm just curious if that's been your experience as well. Let me know in the comments, and I hope you all are doing okay, and I'll see you next time. Bye.